So I'm going to continue our study of Joseph. So we're going to talk about him today and conclude the series tomorrow. Tomorrow? Or it could be tomorrow. Or next Sunday. There's somewhere one day within this 7-day period that we're going to conclude this series. God willing, of course. But has there ever been a time that the past has come back to haunt you? Because there's not one person here that doesn't have some form of a past. Some worse than others. I grew up in church. Mine, I've been wanting to be a pastor since I was second, third grade. So my past is not as needing of as much grace as others. But everybody has a past. And sometimes those things come back. So we have been looking at this passage through the eyes of the dreamer Joseph. We started with Joseph the dreamer, dreaming the dream that his family is going to bow down to him. And of course, at least 10 of his brothers already hated him, and now he has a dream that they are going to bow down to him. And at this time, I don't think Joseph truly understood his dream. He was his father's favorite, so he could have known what it meant before he told his brothers both dreams that he had. Or he was at 17 totally clueless. Because how many times at 17 it's like, oh, I have a dream. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. Right? Even I'm 37. It's like I have a dream of what God has for me. I have no idea how to get there. So Joseph, I don't know exactly everything going through his head. But then his brothers sell him into slavery. Find a point where they're about to kill him. They end up selling him because Reuben's like, no, we cannot do this to our father. Not, we can't do this because we shouldn't do it. It's because we can't do this to our father. Our father would be so heartbroken. So, they end up putting him in a pit, selling him to Egypt. While he is a slave in Egypt, he works up in Potiphar's house. He is in charge of everything in Potiphar's household. Potiphar is pretty much the chief, but he's in charge of putting someone in charge of being a bodyguard to Pharaoh. So his position is high. He is well trusted because if you are in charge of the ones protecting the king, you're going to have a lot of trust. The Pharaoh's probably going to have a lot of trust with you, right? But something happens. Potiphar's wife comes on to Joseph. Joseph kept on saying no. She gets mad, tells a lie that he came on to her. He gets thrown in prison. While in prison, he works up as the most trusted person within the prison. The warden loves him. And when there was a problem, they sent some people to Joseph. And two of those people have a dream. The baker and the cupbearer. And as I said last week, sometimes I don't like this part of the story as much because with the last name Baker, you want the baker to do well. But the baker gets put to death, and the cupbearer gets put to his old position. Based on the interpretation Joseph had for his dreams, it came to be. What the cupbearer dreamed, and then what the baker dreamed, Joseph interpreted, and it happened. Then Joseph in this cupbearer goes, okay, tells the cupbearer, when you go back and you are as you're the king, Pharaoh's main cupbearer, when you hand him that, remember me. I didn't do anything. I should not be here. Joseph pretty much says that. I should not be here. I have done nothing wrong. I should not be been a slave. I should not be in prison. Remember me in front of Pharaoh. So, as many times, which is not the reason I think Joseph gave the cupbearer a good response. It's because it was the true response to his dream, the cupbearer's dream. But guess what the cupbearer does? He totally forgets. Gets put back in position, just like Joseph said. After a couple years, then the Pharaoh has a dream, has two dreams about cows and grain. And no one in the palace, no one in Egypt that he could find interpret his dream. It's like, is there anybody that can interpret my dream? And guess what? The cupbearer goes, oh, wait. There was a guy, when I had a dream, Joseph interpreted it, and what he said would happen, happened. So Pharaoh goes, go get him. They got him, brought him to Pharaoh. Pharaoh told him his dreams, the two dreams that he had, and said these dreams have been the exact same thing. We're going to have 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. Pharaoh asked, okay, what are we going to do about it? Joseph goes, put somebody in charge of during the 7 years of plenty that you're going to store up as much grain to get you through those other 7 years. So, okay, who has the capability like this man? And he goes, and because he could see God in Joseph, he raised Joseph, a Hebrew who became a slave. Hebrews already at this time in Egypt, they were shepherds. Shepherds were the lowest of the low. You could not associate a shepherd with an Egyptian. So a shepherd who also became a slave, who was thrown in prison, was second in command under Pharaoh. Pharaoh was the only thing above Joseph. So this is where we start today. So again, like I've been doing, since there's so many passages, I'm just going to read a few passages, but most of them I'm just going to summarize through. So I recommend that you guys for yourself, if you haven't done already, read the story of Joseph. For one, since I'm summarizing, I'm probably missing a few things. And two, to back up what I'm saying. Because if I get it, I do not want to get anything wrong. And if I do, I want it to be known. Alright. So, start at Genesis 41, 46, and we're going to read through 57. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Joseph left Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout the land of Egypt. So, he was 17 when he got sold. Now he's 30 at this point. So, 13 years in between. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced outstanding harvest. Joseph gathered all the excess food in the land of Egypt during the 7 years and put it in the cities. He put the food in every city from the fields around it. So Joseph stored up grain in such abundance, like the sand of the sea, that he stopped measuring it because it was beyond measure. So let's look at this so far. He had so much grain. When they were counting it, it's like, how much? Can you even imagine that? Having so much food and grain that you just stop counting. I don't think I can even imagine that. Because if I try to fill the parsonage up and the church up, that'd be a lot of food. But this was a lot more than that. 7 years of storing up. There's so much rain, so much harvest. There's so much in the harvest that they were able to store this up. And where they had enough food, they're in the 7 years of plenty. So this stuff is extra. This isn't what they're eating on during the 7 years. Because it's not like, oh, I'm not eating very much. I'm just storing up everything up. They're still eating well and storing all this stuff. I would think that was a lot of grain. And some of you guys have farming backgrounds. I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I know nothing about farming. I know nothing about harvest. So you guys so if you think 7 years of just collecting all this, that's a lot of, I would think it was a lot of work. And back then, they didn't have all the equipment we have now. They didn't have tractors. They had, all that was mostly done by hand. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced outstanding harvests. Joseph gathered all the excess food in the land of Egypt during the 7 years and put it in the cities. He put the food in every city from the fields around it. So Joseph stored up grain in from abundance like the sea of grain that he stopped measuring it because it was beyond measure. Two sons were born to Joseph before the years of famine arrived. Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore them to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh and said, God has made me forget all the hardship and my whole family. And the second son he named Ephraim and said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So in this, and this actually is my first point, is how do you guys like it when you are in a time of abundance? When life is going great. We like those points, right? And he forgets pretty much everything that happened to him. From being sold by his brothers. He thinks he put it, okay, it's gone, it's done away with. I've got everything. I've got more than I ever thought I would have. Again, a Hebrew boy in the land of Egypt. No one would have thought. But passes behind him. He doesn't have to worry about a thing. Then, of course, life happens, right? I mean, guys, even in the time of abundance, then life happens. Or as the past couple of years, COVID happened. Where you're like, didn't know what's going to be open, didn't know, what people are going to do, which stores are, especially in South Dakota, some stores require masks, some didn't, some stores won't even open. We closed for just 2 months, or a month and a half, which is less than most people did. Then the 7 years of abundance and the land of Egypt came to an end. And the 7 years of famine began. So as Joseph had said, there was a famine in every land, but the whole land of Egypt there was food. When the whole land of Egypt was stricken by famine, the people cried out to Pharaoh for food. Pharaoh told all Egypt, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you." Now the famine had spread across the whole region. So Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Every land came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, for the famine was severe in every land. So now life has hit you. And not just small. Egypt and the surrounding regions was now in famine, where they had enough grain not just to feed the people in Egypt for 7 years. Because remember, this is going to be a 7-year time frame. So you're going to be saving up much as possible if you know you're going to... If it was just my family, how much food could I save up and make sure I have for 7 years? There's still quite a bit. I'd probably have to fill a lot of downstairs, have a lot of canned goods downstairs. But then you include all of Egypt and the surrounding areas that are also going through this. So can you think of, not to say that the area was as big as the United States, but it could have been, that you had enough food to feed people, because you saved up so much food because you knew this was coming, to feed everybody in the United States for 7 years. That's a lot of food. Could you be able to feed anybody for 7 years? But Egypt was the only one that had food saved up. Now, there's probably some places that had a little bit of a storehouse, was able to eat on it for a few months. But then that ran out because they couldn't have any more harvests. Everything was dry. Everything was, couldn't plant anything. So God, if it wasn't for Joseph and the Pharaoh's dreams, putting Joseph in the right place at the right time to store up those, they could feed people from all around Egypt, coming to Egypt for 7 years. So this next part is when life really changes for Joseph. They're already probably within a year of the famine. So he's probably about 38. I'll be 38 in July. Because he was 30 when he started. 7 years is probably a year later. So he's around 37, 38. He's handing out, Pharaoh said, go to Joseph. He's in charge of all that. I trust him for everything. Anything he says, do it. So people come from all around. And he sees the blast from his past. 10 of his brothers coming to him. And his brothers do not know it's Joseph. Because, again, he was 17 when he was sold into slavery. 13 years after that, Pharaoh raised him up. Then, 7 years plenty. A year later. So, His brothers haven't seen him. And he also speaks through an interpreter. Even though he can understand his brother speaking, he didn't want his brothers to know that it was him. Because how many people know the same language in Egypt as these Hebrews? Only a few. This interpreter knew many languages. So he speaks to this interpreter. And Joseph calls them spies because he wants to test them. He wants to test what his brothers done if they have changed him. So he calls them spies. But he also wants to know how his family's doing. If you have not seen your family in over 20 years, and you loved your father, and why Joseph didn't go back any and see his father after he was raised, I don't know. Raised up out of slavery, out of prison, I don't know. I can't speak for Joseph. But for some reason, he never went back, saying, I'm here. He left everything from his past. He just covered it up. My life is good now. I don't know what my brother would do to me. There probably has a lot of thoughts. That would be my thought. I don't know what my brothers would do to me. Although I've got an army behind me that would go with me. I just don't know. But he sees his brothers. He calls them spies, throws them into jail. And in that, they tell him that, and all this, tell him about his family. Yeah, our father's still alive. Do you have any other siblings? We have a younger brother, and we have one that, at this time, they probably figured that Joseph would be dead by now. So they tell him about Benjamin, and he's in jail. It's like, okay, just one of you go back. I'm going to keep everyone. It's like, no, our dad would not like that. So they're there for a little bit. Then he sends the rest of them. So, okay, I'm only going to keep one. They keep Simeon, gave him the grain, and then they go off and said, you cannot return unless you bring your younger brother back. If you want to prove you're not a spy, bring your brother back, and I will believe you. So as the 9 of them start heading off, and I was trying to look up how far it was from Canaan to Egypt. And I got different amounts. The most likely is between 200 and 500 miles away. So, and they're pretty much walking the whole distance. So, it could be, probably a 6 to, if they're walking about 31 miles per day, I left the figures in my office, but it's probably about 6-7 days. It was close to 500, more of 16-day journey. It's a long walk, isn't it? How many of you guys would want to walk that long? And they also had their camels. Not the camels, but their donkeys. Donkeys I know they had. They could have had camels. Camels can last a little bit longer without having to stop for water. But whenever they finally stopped, they thought they would check their bags, and they find the money that they want to pay in their bags. What would be your first thought if they're already mad at you, at least in your mind, you think that these Egyptians have it in for you? Not knowing what really is going on. As we read the Bible, we know what's going on. Joseph's brothers know. It's like sometimes when you watch a movie, you see more of this backdrop. We know this backdrop. But this account, this true story about Joseph and his brothers, His brothers knew nothing. All they knew is they were supposed to get grain, bring it back home. And in all this, they get thrown in prison for saying that they're being called spies. So now they have the very money they paid for the grain. It's like, what are they going to do when they find out? So they go home, tell Jacob, their father, everything. It's like, we've got to take Benjamin. Simeon's there. They have Simeon until we get back. And Jacob goes, right? Benjamin is Joseph's only full brother. Everybody else is his half-brother. So Joseph was Jacob's favorite. Now Benjamin is his favorite. Do you think Jacob's going to just let him and just let him take him? Because Benjamin's probably in his early 20s at this time. So Benjamin's old enough to make his own decisions. But he's like, no. Jacob's like, no. I've already lost one son, who Jacob thought it was to a wild animal. I lost Simeon in Egypt because he's there in Egypt. I'm not losing another one. So they stay for a while until the grain is almost out. And Joseph's brothers comes back to Joseph saying, okay, we've got to go. We're not going to be able to survive unless we go back and get some more grain. We cannot. It's just impossible. Jacob goes, no, I cannot lose another son. I just cannot. How would you feel if you have already lost one? One was in prison for something he didn't do, and you don't want to lose your other favorite. Your one favorite you thought was dead. It's like, no. And Judah goes, I will be responsible. I will be responsible for him. If he does not come back, it's on me. Then after a little bit, Jacob finally goes, okay, you go. But you better bring Benjamin back. So as they go, they meet with Joseph again. Because Joseph here is where everybody has to go. So they see Joseph. Joseph actually invites them, through the interpreter, of course, to his house. And his brother doesn't know what they're actually going to do. Because not that they would end up getting in trouble. So when they get to the house, they tell the person at the gate, saying, this is what happened. Well, on our way, we found this. The silver that we used to pay for the grain, was in there. We promise. We did not take it. It was in there. And he goes, then God did it. He put it there. So then they ate with Joseph. And the most interesting part about that have you guys ever watched The Masked Singer? But sometimes Becky will watch. It's a show about, it's actually celebrities from, it could be a sports person, an actor, a singer, whatever. They have costumes, they sing, and they have to get to try to figure out who it is. So throughout the season, each week somebody gets voted out, you see who it is. But in this time, there's these clues that you have that they, some of the time they're subtle, sometimes that you can, overall you can tell. And this would be one thing, the clue that this is Joseph, or somebody that they know, was apparent. Because, again, these brothers were different age ranges, within probably over a 20-year span. But you wouldn't know exactly their range. With my brothers, even with four of us, you may put one person and another, and think that one of my brothers is older than the other. But, so you have 11 of these brothers that he puts in order by age. They look around and it's like, how in the world does he know that? And then Joseph starts talking, and he's talking in their tongue, in their language. And of course, Benjamin goes, how do you know our language? And they eat. The next day they get the new grain, and they're on their way. This is where Joseph really tests them. So on their way, Joseph had one of his people that is under Joseph to go put his cup that he drinks with in Benjamin's. Not Judah, not Reuben, not Simeon's, not one of the older ones, but Benjamin's sack of grain. Then after they go out, and his brothers leave, they're probably, a few hours out. Just goes, okay, now go and say that somebody took his cup. So he gets there saying, somebody took our master's cup. They're like, it could have been us. If it was, take his life, and let us go. Until they figured out whose bag it was in. They put their bags down, they open it up. The Egyptians, the servants, slaves, look through it, and they find it in Benjamin. His brother, the one that they said they would promise to bring back. It's in his bag. Whoa. Okay, let us be slaves. Let him go. All of us will be slaves. So his brothers, who sold Joseph into slavery, was now defending, saying, we will take the punishment. Let him go. One, Benjamin would never do that. But let us take the punishment. We can't do this to our father. And sometimes, with our past, they are in this account with Joseph and his brothers. His brothers are like, this is all happened because of what we did to Joseph. If we hadn't done it, Reuben's like, I told you so. I told you not to harm the boy. But look what's all this is happening. In their mind, again, they don't know what really is going on in the background. They don't know it's Joseph. All they can say, today they would go, oh, it's karma, right? This is all happening because of what we did back then. And they plead with Joseph, do not. We'll be your slaves. Do anything to us. Just don't do it to Benjamin. That the past in their minds, when they were tested by the past because of what they did, because of course Joseph knew what was going on, because he was the one doing it to his brothers. Have you ever played a trick like this to your brothers or vice versa? I don't think I've played tricks on my brothers, but nothing like this. But when they return, they are fearful. They are scared. They are ready to go to prison. They are ready to be a slave because of Benjamin. So we can't do that to our father. We did it once. We can't allow this to happen again. But Joseph sees a change with his brothers. The ones that always talked down to him. His brothers were awful to him. But he finally sees a change with his brothers. And Joseph just breaks down and weeps. And reveals everything. And again, it reminds me of with the Masked Singer when they actually reveal who the person is. Joseph says, I am Joseph. Because he doesn't go by Joseph at this time. Pharaoh gave him a new name when he gave him the position. So that's what he went by his Egyptian name in Egypt. Everything from his life before was covered up until his brothers came. But at this time he goes, I am Joseph. He reveals himself. And he forgives his brothers. I can't even imagine going through what Joseph went through. Being hated by my brothers. There's times when me and my brothers didn't get along. Did you guys always get along with your siblings? Do you and your siblings still sometimes argue and fight? Probably. If you have any siblings. But they beat him. They threw him in a pit. They sold him into slavery. I can't even imagine going through that. Especially with one of my brothers. And with me, I'm the oldest. But Joseph, being the next to youngest, goes through all this. But Joseph, in all this, and although, like I said before, he covers everything up because life is good, I don't have to remember it all. He doesn't even return, like I mentioned, he doesn't return to go see Jacob. He covered it so much, the person that he loves the most, he doesn't even go see. Through 7 years of plenty. You know, in chariot, it's probably only a couple days' journey. Doesn't go at all. But now, Task came back and realized that he did not let it go when his brothers came up. Covered it up. How many of you guys have covered up things of your past? I think it's so much easier when things are good. Oh, I forgot all about that. I've covered it up. It does not affect me until some circumstance comes back. Like, oh, maybe I haven't dealt with it. Now, one thing with me is when I was going through the ordination process in Nebraska, when we were in Alliance, things changed a lot, and I realized that the last few years that the one guy that I didn't talk too much because until I actually met him finally a couple years ago, I was putting my anger of another guy who was stopping everything that I was trying to do. I put it on this other guy. Until I met him, I was like, and I thought I was over it. I'm like, you know what? My feelings for what I felt here was applied over here. And sometimes when our past comes back, because when we moved to Oklahoma, okay, I'm going to forget everything. I got my teaching certificate. God called us back here. And I then had to associate everything that happened in Alliance again. And met some of the people that I didn't get to meet when we were in Alliance. We were like, okay, I'm done. Joseph covered it up, but had to deal with his problems. This dreamer. And in this, I didn't even mention, his brothers ended up bowing down. When they didn't even know it was Joseph. So his dreams were fulfilled. His brothers bowed down to him. this dreamer who covered all this up, thought he had everything covered. It's like, I'm good. It doesn't affect me. Oh no, it's back. Do you guys have something in your life that you guys continue to cover up? It's like, it's done and away with. Until it comes back into memory. When a person comes back into your life, even for a short time, that you need to show forgiveness, you need forgiveness, whatever it may